Hi, I'm Daryl Cronzy. You can see that I'm decked out in my steelhead gear. I've got my float rod, my float reel, and I've got the mighty Saugeen River behind me. Now listen, today I'm doing something a little different. Like most steelheaders, I don't expect to catch a fish every time I go down to the river. But we're gonna talk about something, and it's really important. It's called community fisheries involvement. I've got the Ontario Steelheaders, and I've also got the Lake Huron Fishing Club. And I wanna tell you the story they're doing on the Saugeen. They're about to make it the greatest steelhead river east of the Rocky Mountains. Now let me ask you one question. A steelhead is always a rainbow. But why is a rainbow not always a steelhead? We'll tell you that later. But I got one Saugeen steelhead this morning, so stick with us because we really got a story to tell you.
I'm going fishing all of the time, and my baby's going fishing too. Bet your life that your sweet wife can catch more fish than you. Any fish will bite if you got the right bait. Now here's a little something that I'd like to relate. With my pole and my line, I'm going fishing. Yes, I'm going fishing. My baby's going fishing too.
Going Fishing with Daryl Cronzy is brought to you in part by Yamaha. Reliability with every turn of the key. G3 Boats, a Yamaha boat company. Abu Garcia, for life. Berkeley, catch more fish. And by Daryl Cronzy's Canadian Fisherman's Breading and Batter Mix. Closed captioning for Going Fishing is brought to you by Skeet Soap. If you and your family are concerned about DEET, use Skeet.
The Saugeen River of Central Ontario is one big, beautiful length of river system. By the word big, we could actually say this waterway is massive. It's one of the longest river systems in the province with a flowage of more than 800 miles. When it comes to fish and fishing, the Saugeen is synonymous with steelhead. In fact, the Big Flow is recognized as one of Eastern Canada's finest steelhead streams. Anglers travel from all over Ontario and also from the American Midwest to fish the mighty Saugeen 365 days of the year. The fishing can always be rated as good, but in the future, some special individuals are hoping to change the word good to exceptional and even world class. Prime trout rivers all have one thing in common. They must have cool, clean, clear headwaters for adult fish to construct their redds and deposit their eggs to ensure the future of the species. The Saugeen has just that. Not just a few miles of prime spawning water exists in this system, but hundreds of miles of classic incubation and nursery waters exist in the upper reaches of the Saugeen and her many tributaries. Upon hatching, young steelhead hold over in these nursery areas for upwards of a year or more before dropping down into the deeper stretches of the Saugeen. Here they hold and feed and transform from fingerling to smolt. Once they attain sufficient size and strength, the growing fish enter the smolting stage of their lives and no longer feel the need to stay within the river. No longer holding in the current, the young fish turn and head downstream to Lake Huron. Here, they will feed on the abundance of forage in the lake and mature as full-grown adults. Then, one day, they will start the cycle all over again and return to these same headwaters to deposit their eggs and ensure the survival of their race. But even on the mighty Saugeen, all things are not perfect when it comes to steelhead survival and the betterment of the fishery. In the open lake, the young fish are often prey to bigger fish. As adults, the steelhead must also avoid commercial gill nets that are set throughout the lake. But the biggest threat to the life cycle of the Saugeen steelhead is the number of dams that hinder or totally halt their migration upstream to the spawning grounds. Some of the lower dams, such as Denny's Dam at Southampton, have fishways installed to allow the steelhead passage over and around the obstructions. From one end of Canada to the other, dams prevent fish migration and hinder the survival of fish of all species. Thankfully, across Canada, volunteers have taken up the goal of helping fish survive. Today, thousands of sportsmen from British Columbia to Newfoundland are restoring fish habitat or creating artificial spawning channels. Hundreds of public fish hatcheries are being constructed and operated by the volunteer workers. Sportsmen have also recognized the importance of imprinting fish to their release sites, and now the science of pen rearing has spread throughout the Great Lakes to ensure the improvement of the open water trout and salmon fishery. Volunteers are also trapping, netting, and transporting adult salmon and trout around the dams and actually delivering them to the spawning grounds.
Going Fishing returns in a moment.
Now listen, before I go any farther, what's the name?
John Colina,
What nationality is that?
Italian.
Now this guy is, if he's not the best, he's one of the best, but I'm going to say you're the best rod builder in Canada right now. Tell me something. Why does a person want a custom rod?
They can get what they're looking for. The size of the cork, the length of the cork,
The
colors.
species they're going to fish?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. If you're fishing bass, you want a special rod for bass.
Okay. What is the ideal length for a smallmouth, largemouth bass rod?
Oh, anywhere from 6.5 to 7 feet. I've seen them 6 feet.
Okay, now we know the muskies are a little shorter and they're a little stiffer rod,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Now, for an ideal steelhead float rod, would you say, I know they get them from 9 feet up to 16 feet. What would you say is if you're going to get one built?
13'6".
13.6?
Yep.
Is that for midgets like me, or is that for 6-foot guys like me?
No. That's the norm. 13'6" is an all-purpose float rod, I think.
Okay, you've been building rods for how long?
Since 1972.
Are a lot of people getting into building their own rods, or are they coming to you to make them?
There's I'm getting quite a few, but there's the odd guys which are giving it a try, and they're enjoying it.
Now, John, I've got to say something. 4 years ago to 30 years ago, there were a lot of blanks out there. About 2 years ago, everybody, or pretty well everybody, got out of the blank business. You're importing from China, Japan, Australia, right? But a good buddy of ours, and I hate to say his name, but this guy's name is Gary Loomis. Now, he called me the other night, and he's coming back out. We are going to see an American-made rod blank.
That's fantastic news.
You know?
That is just fantastic news.
I don't want to shake up some of those big tackle corporations out there, but here's the problem. A lot of people get one rod made for their lifetime.
Right.
And again, we're going to the Orient, or we're going to Australia, or we're going to Italy for our rod blanks. Gary Loomis is coming out with an American-made rod blank. It's going to be hot.
Great news.
And you're going to make them for me.
I'm going to make them. If I
Now-
can get them, I'll make them.
John Kalina. Now, whereabouts do you live?
In Caledonia, Ontario.
Where's Caledonia? You got a little bit of problems around Caledonia, but let's just talk about Caledonia.
Nothing out here. No problems out here.
Not along the river on the
No,
Grand.
not along the river on the Grand, no.
John, what's your website?
jctackle.com.
.com? Say that one more time. I got a bad ear.
jctackle.com.
Now listen, honest to God, it's like a custom knife. Everybody needs a custom fishing rod. If you want the best custom fishing rod made anywhere in Canada, see John Kalina. And I forgot that website again. What is it?
jctackle.
jctackle.com.
Yep.
Somebody's going to say, that guy's getting old. He's asked you 4 or 5 times. jctackle.com for the best custom fishing rod you are ever going to get. And listen, tell him you saw it on Cronzy's show and he'll give you a 25% discount. As already noted, the steelhead fishing on the Saugeen is as good or better than any other river in eastern Canada. The best fishing is generally found near the town of Southampton, Ontario, with a stretch of river from Lake Huron upstream to Denny's Dam receiving the most attention from visiting anglers. In fact, perhaps as much as 95% of the sport fishing on the entire river takes place below Denny's Dam. Many of the trout being caught are wild fish returning to the river of their birth, but others, even the majority, are now the result of a joint venture between 2 volunteer organizations. Members of the Saugeen Steelheaders and the neighboring Lake Huron Fishing Club have forged a partnership that will in the future transform the Saugeen into not only a great steelhead river, but without a doubt the finest steelhead fishery found anywhere east of the Rocky Mountains. You know, I'm with, I guess I could call this guy a relic. How old are you right now?
70.
I thought you were 90.
Getting there. Feel like 90.
How long we known each other?
30 years.
It was about 30 years ago we sat down in Bronte, and there was some guys. There was John Slade, Barry Spencer, Frank the Simbin. What was Larry's name?
Olden.
Who was the guy that built that steelhead ride for me?
Dave Towers.
Dave Towers. And we're going to get in trouble because we're going to forget guys. Lauren Green. But they
Al
started...
Winters.
Al Winters. They started the Ontario Steelheaders. And you are probably the longest running member of the Steelheaders, I'd say, in Canada right now.
Right.
Right? Rodney's got something different. Rodney is, you're almost the father of the river here, I'd say. And you may not want to hear this, but it's true.
Well, I've been fishing it since 65.
About 4 or 5 years ago, you sat down with a bunch of people and said, let's improve the Saugeen. And you guys have been improving the Saugeen for years and years and years. Rod, you guys are moving adult fish up the rivers. And explain why and what you're doing.
We move adult fish upriver. There's 3 barriers on the river that the fish have problems navigating. There's a dam at Walkerton. We built a fishway on there years ago. It works partially, could be improved. There's a power dam at Maple Hill, which needs a better fishway on that. And there's an old hydro dam that just has a sluiceway that the fish have problem getting through because the velocity of the water is too great and too long. They run out of gas trying to get through it. So therefore we transport them up into headwaters of good nursery and spawning streams, and that helps with natural reproduction. And
How many fish would you move a year?
we have moved over 1,200 in 1 year. Lately we've been cutting back on it because we are working on the smoke program with the Lake Huron Club, and it's working out very well. We're getting better returns than natural reproduction, but natural reproduction, we'd like to keep that going if we get these barriers cleared up.
And this river could run its own course if we had the barriers out of there.
The river would run by itself without a whole lot of work. The smoke program is doing a tremendous job, but natural reproduction and natural is the way to go if we could possibly ever get there.
You're doing a heck of a job. I mean, there's no two ways about it.
Working on it.
For an old guy, you're
Work in
pretty good.
progress.
For an old guy, you're pretty good.
Work in progress.
The Ontario Steelheaders have been the protective godfathers of the Saugeen River for more than 40 years. Recognizing the problems of the dams obstructing the steelhead migration to the spawning beds, club members have taken it upon themselves to trap fish at Denny's Dam Fishway and load grown adults into the specially constructed Saugeen Steelhead Fishmobile for the long overland journey to prime spawning waters more than 40 miles above the dam. Members of the Steelheaders have constructed a small fish hatchery upriver. Some of the eggs and sperm are collected from adult steelhead at Denny's Dam and then relocated to the facility where they are incubated, hatched, and released as fry into the upper river. But it has been the partnership of the Ontario Steelheaders and the Lake Huron Fishing Club that will make the greatest improvement to the Saugeen sport fishery in the future. A few years back, the two clubs devised a plan with the approval of the Ministry of Natural Resources to inject more wild strain steelhead into the Saugeen system. This would not only improve fishing, but also in the future increase the number of returning spawning adults to the system. Mr. Al Wilkinson, can I shake your hand?
Oh, thank you, Daryl.
Now, can I call you El Presidente of the Lake Huron Fishing Club, or the Assistant El Presidente, or the Lake Huron Fishing Club Trout Hatchery Manager?
Well, I'm vice president of the club, but I am trout hatchery manager, and that's the job I love the best, so let's stick with trout hatchery manager.
I want you to understand what these guys are doing, and this comes back through the Volunteer Fisheries Program, or CFIP, or CWIP, whatever they call it, and this is happening right across Canada. But these guys down in Kincardine have got something really special. You're raising how many rainbow trout or steelhead for the Saugeen River?
We're putting 60,000 yearling rainbow trout every year into the Saugeen River, and we're putting in another 60,000 yearling brown trout into Lake Huron.
And in the old days, we said, okay, well, it was in the old days, a couple years ago, we said, okay, let's raise these rainbow trout to at least 8 inches. You guys got them 8 to 10 inches, and you're stocking them way up the river so they're imprinting, right?
That's correct.
Now, these are fish that, when I come to this hatchery, I run or roll them in some coating mix and fry these things up. But it's that good. So you guys have really, really done something here. I mean, there's no two ways about it. But you've got your brown trout, and you got your steelhead and your rainbow trout here, and you've got a hatchery over in Port Elgin too.
We figure if we're taking fish out of the lake, we got to do something to put fish back into the lake, and that's what all our volunteers donate their time and efforts towards.
And it's strictly, nobody's paid, 365-day-a-year job.
That's correct. It's strictly volunteers. We get a token funding from the Ministry of Natural Resources, pays less than 10% of our
Not even a
costs.
light bill. Now here's what bothers me. If you guys are putting in 50 to 60,000 steelhead, right? This is just me saying it. I want McGilty or McGinty, whatever his name is. I want him. If you guys are putting in 50, 60,000, the government should be putting in 50, 60,000. How's that sound?
I think that would be a great idea.
Anyways, let me shake your hand on my part, and thank you very much for your club members, what you're doing on the Saugeen River. It's really something.
We appreciate that positive feedback there.
And support these guys. Go to the Chantry Chinook Classic, is that what it's called?
Our fishing derby in the summer, Chantry Chinook Classic, every dollar from that derby goes back into putting fish back into the lake.
Support these guys, and you politicians, smarten up, support these guys, give them a lot more money than what you're not getting much right now. I can say that. The volunteer operation has the Ontario Steelheaders once again working the fishway at Denny's Dam every spring, not only for their own goals of shipping adults upriver, but also now collecting large numbers of ripe eggs from female steelhead and sperm from the adult males. The eggs and sperm, when collected, are then shipped to Kincardine, Ontario, where the Lake Huron Fishing Club has a state-of-the-art volunteer-operated cold water fish hatchery. Here, the eggs are fertilized, incubated, hatched, and reared. The actual rearing part of the process is important. It's called tender, loving care. For 12 months, volunteers babysit their fin babies. Come spring, those babies have grown into 8 to 10-inch silver-sided steelhead smolt and are ready for the release back into the Saugeen and to start a whole new sport fishery. Back come the Ontario Steelheaders to assist the Lake Huron Fishing Club with the task of distributing almost 100,000 prime-condition steelhead smolt into those cold, clear upstream waters of the Saugeen in the vicinity of Walkerton, Ontario. 2 transport tankers work as much as 2 weeks to make certain that the smolt arrive safely to their release sites. It's important to note that the release locations are more than 50 miles from the mouth of the river downstream at Southampton, giving the young released fish plenty of time to soak in the scents and the surroundings of the Saugeen as they make their journey down to the lake. This is called proper imprinting, and it's important for maximum returns 2 or 3 years after their release.
Going Fishing returns in a moment.
You know what the problem with steelhead fishing is? There never seems to be enough days to get down to the river to fish these magnificent silver creatures. Now, I'm not an old fart like Rod Jones, but I'm almost an old fart like Rod Jones. 40 years ago, right up to today, a lot of guys are bottom bouncing, and what they're doing is they're using reels like this little Cardinal 3, light graphite rods, 6 to 8 pound test, and they use split shot, a foot to maybe 5 feet above their spawn or their single eggs. They quarter cast upstream, and they let the sinker take the bait down and bounce along bottom. And you keep your line across that finger, and you're actually feeling that line and that bait bouncing along the bottom. If it holds up for a minute, if it pauses or it gets jerked, well, then you jerk back on the rod. Now, that's the old school, but guys are still using it. These days, though, a lot of steelheaders are switching over to float reels. Now, float reels, instead of feeling the bite, you're using floats to act as an indicator. And the float actually carries that bait down the bottom of the river naturally in front of the fish. We're running rods that are anywhere from 12 to 20 feet long, okay? And it's not a real difficult sport. It is going to take you anywhere from a week to a couple weeks to learn what happens. And the main difficulty in the sport is you're running a float reel. Now, this is an Islander steelheader. It's not probably. It is the #1 float reel in North America. It's got a ton of ball bearings in it. When you cast out, this line will float and carry naturally down the river, okay? So when that bait's going down, it's natural in front of Mr. Steelhead. But again, you need a float reel like the Islander. Look at that thing. You can almost blow that line off that reel. Okay, now, if you think you're gonna have trouble with a float reel, then instead of the float reel, get yourself a good level wind reel. Same thing, it's the same length, anywhere from 12 to 20 feet long. I would go 14 to 16 if you really want a decent float reel. But instead of that float reel, and this is a lot easier to use, the level wind's got enough ball bearings like this little Abu Revo. All you've got to do is make the cast. First off, you want to disengage the line in the drag. You make the cast, and if you look what happens, it almost comes off as easy as it does on a float reel, okay? Steelhead fishing is easy, it's simple, and it's rewarding. Now, I've got one other thing to say. There are some guys on the river that call themselves steelheaders, and in my books, they're not steelheaders. They'll come dressed up with all the gear, they've got all the expensive rods, they'll cast up the stream, quarter cast like anybody else, and they'll let that float drift down. But when they finish their drift, instead of engaging the reel and winding in, at the end of the drift, they'll rip, okay? Or they'll pop, what we say. And what they're doing is ripping and popping, and in my books, they're no better than snaggers. They're dragging that line across the fish of some of these trout in the river that are trying to spawn. Listen, if you're gonna float fish, or if you're gonna fish steelhead, do it legally. Now finally to the question, why is a steelhead a rainbow and yet a rainbow is not always a steelhead? Steelhead are members of the same family, but they're born in streams and drop downriver into big water, such as the Pacific Ocean or the Great Lakes. Lake rainbow trout actually spawn in small streams, but they live in small lakes. Is the partnership between the Ontario Steelheaders and Lake Huron Fishing Club a success? You bet. In fact, bright young steelhead were returning the river and showing up in angler catches that very first autumn after their release. Today, tens of thousands of juvenile and adult steelhead from the program are providing phenomenal fishing on the Saugeen. Will it get even better in the future? You bet. It can only get better. Still, there is a need and a desire by anglers to remove a number of upstream dams that still obstruct steelhead from reaching the fertile spawning grounds. Some dams are presently deemed useless by fishermen and by the government biologists as well. If the dams were removed or breached, volunteer anglers would have no need for fish transfer tanks or fish hatcheries for that matter. The Saugeen is more than 700 miles long. Today, steelhead can navigate only 100 miles of the system without the aid of volunteers. I'm Daryl Cronzy, and allow me to tip my angling cap to the efforts and rewards of the Ontario Steelheaders and the Lake Huron Fishing Club, as well as fishing volunteers everywhere across Canada.
Going Fishing with Daryl Cronzy has been brought to you in part by Yamaha, reliability with every turn of the key. G3 Boats, a Yamaha boat company. Abu Garcia, for life. Berkeley, catch more fish. And by Daryl Cronzy's Canadian Fisherman's Breading and Batter Mix. Going Fishing would like to thank the following fine sponsors.
Going fishing, baby, smiling.